Hey there everyone, and welcome back to the 4th episode of Salmon Report, and I'm eager to talk a little bit about this week's rotation and hopefully help out a bit. The channel has reached over 30,000 subscribers last week, and I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone who is supporting my Splatoon content. I'm truly grateful, and I hope I can only improve my content further and still offer good entertainment and information, so thank you again. This week I also finally finished my Kohozuna and Extra Wave guide on how to beat Kohozuna and give my best tips and recommendations for it. If you missed it, I highly recommend that video. But before we get started, the usual quick introduction to newcomers. Salmon Report is a weekly series introducing the weapon rotations to Salmon Run and sharing tips and hints with each other for the week or in general to get better at this fantastic game mode. Now let's get started. This week is looking pretty strong, if maybe a bit technical, but I'm much more excited for these rotations than before, as we're getting a good bit of variety fortunately, except maybe for the ballpoint Splatling. It's one of the best weapons for Salmon Run, but getting it for the 3rd time already gets a bit too much. Overall, most of these weapons are pretty straightforward to be fair, so I might not have that much to talk about this episode, but that's also great as it means each rotation has weapons that shouldn't cause any trouble for the majority. But there's still a few things worth mentioning just in case. First rotation starting on spawning grounds, the current one, we have the 52 gal, ballpoint Splatling, bamboozler, and the jet squelcher. Let's talk about the 52 gal and the squelcher together since they're your standard shooters, and there's not a lot to talk about their technique on how to use them, but rather what to look out for. They're somewhat opposites of each other, with the 52 gal being in close to mid-range and the squelcher for long range, but I would be careful in getting too close to anything with either of them as both of them have the same weakness of being pretty mediocre if not bad painters, but especially the squelcher. Keep to your maximum range and play to your strength as you're generally good against everything. The gal should focus more on mobility, floppers, steel eels, maws, hordes, anything that tends to get closer. And as the jet squelcher, which I think is the weaker weapon this rotation, one good strength to play is your ability to get fish sticks down before they even arrive, focus on those steelheads like a charger would, and also since you have an exceptional range, you're great at taking out stingers and even big shots from safe distance. For the ballpoint, I mean, it's been said for the past 2 episodes, but a reminder, make use of the 2 firing modes as the close range burst is an absolute splatting machine and a fantastic painter, and you always have your long range option as well. Continue practicing your range control, full charge to have burst shots and only partial charges to keep your range. The weapon that I think requires a bit of explanation this map is the bamboozler, as it's generally giving some headaches to people, but it's actually pretty good and in my opinion is the best painter this rotation. For its playstyle, it's somewhere between a tap firing weapon and a charger, and I like to call it a rhythm weapon as you have to get used to this weird rhythm of charging up each of your shots really fast and keep tap firing, which is quite unique as weapons go. It's one of the hardest weapons I think for Salmon Run, but those who master it can really carry teams. It's still very good against steelheads and taking out priority targets, but you have to play a bit mobile compared to a normal charger and help out your team where you can. And thanks to your increased mobility, it's actually great at egg collecting and also taking out targets like a stinger on the shore. I wouldn't recommend tap fire spamming with a bamboozler, it's not that good and you charge your shots so fast it's just generally better, so that's a trap immediately, especially when you find yourself in close range. But the strength of the bamboozler is that different levels of your charges are good for different situations and mastering it can only help you. Not to mention that whether you charge or not your shots, your range actually stays the same with the bamboozler. But the final tip for painting is that since you charge your shots really fast and it's still a charger gun, you're pretty much the best painter this rotation and you should focus on that, since the other guns are not that great at this task. Same way as you would paint with a normal charger, but instead do full charges and keep moving to left or right, painting in a line. Your shots cover a very long path this way, not to mention it easily splats flipper floppers, so don't forget about that. Next rotation will be on Sockeye Station, and I think this is the best run this week, so I recommend pushing your ranks on this map if you're interested, but that's just my opinion. The weapons are the Arrow Spray, Undercover Brella, Flings Roller, and the Heavy Splatling. The Heavy Splatling is going to be your jack of all trades best gun this rotation, but it's not a mini Splatling, so you gotta be careful. Make sure to stay at range, which will be the tower in the middle for best position, and take out targets you excel against such as steelheads, fish sticks, and steel eels thanks to your range and high ground. Your weakness is definitely getting too close to danger, so I would recommend sticking to the tower as much as you can and leave hordes and close-up fights to the Arrow Spray. For the Flings Roller, I recommend checking out my Dynamo Roller video from yesterday for an in-depth look at rollers overall and give you an idea how you should play a roller. But for a quick summary, flings are good, but remember that rollers can roll through most lesser salmonids even with slowly walking forward and not consuming ink at all. They're excellent at crowd controlling as long as you watch your ink capacity. The Undercover Brella has been buffed since Splatoon 2 and Salmon Run, and I personally am very fond of this weapon. I recommend to keep it to short range and take priority splats, such as stingers on the shore, but you're also excellent at taking care of hordes like chums and small fry. Thanks to their shield, Brellas can use them to block dangerous projectiles such as bombs or missiles from a flyfish to completely negate their damage, so they're excellent at kiting flyfishes instead of their coworkers. Brellas also excel at Rush Wave, so if you get glowflies, make sure to be in the front and let your shield take care of them trying to get past you while your team does the rest of the work. During grillers, it's also your responsibility to take care of the small fries. In general, a lot of these waves fail not because of the grillers themselves, but because of the small fries and that the player with the weapon against them does not know their weapon's role, so don't forget that. Lastly, the arrow spray. It's a pretty straightforward but very short-range automatic shooter. There's not much to talk about it, except a big warning considering its damage. Most players absolutely overestimate the damage of the arrow spray, but in fact it's quite a middle pack weapon and it isn't that strong overall, especially not on Kohazuna. The Splatling is considerably better when it comes to damage, so instead I recommend to stay within your role as the arrow spray is the best painter you have here. Make sure to cover as much ground as you can, and also thanks to your mobility, go for priority targets instead of letting them overrun your team, so stingers, flyfish, and big shots, though you will need some help on the latter. And with that, we arrive to the third rotation, which is on the Hydroplant again. This time with the weapons, Dapple Dually, Sloshing Machine, Range Blaster, and the Squiffer. I would have said this is the best rotation because of the Dapple Dualies, which are probably the strongest non-Grisco weapon, but also the Squiffer in the rotation, but sadly they're paired with the Sloshing Machine and the Range Blaster, which pulls them back quite a lot, even if the map is fairly decent for them. The Dapple Dualies are possibly the best weapon in Salmon Run, also being in the top 3 best DPS overall next to the Hydra Splatling and the Splushiomatic. The Dapple Dualies are very short range, but they're an absolute monster when it comes to performance. Shreds all bosses, hordes, and also great at painting at all times. But remember to make use of its dodge roll for increased accuracy and firing rate to really bring out its strengths. During Extra Wave, the Dapples are pretty much the definition of a weapon that should constantly be on Kohazuna, as you will be doing far more damage than if you were to bother with eggs, so only help where it's really needed for your team. The Squiffer is also a top weapon and is very strong in Salmon Run. It charges faster than the Splat Charger but has less range, but it still excels at boss splatting and piercing through hordes. Overall, it has great damage, charge time paired with good mobility and painting like other chargers, but it differentiates itself with having better ink efficiency and fire rate than its brothers, so you can play a bit more aggressively with it. It should still mainly be used to boss splatting, so steelheads, big shots, and scrappers are top priority for the Squiffer, and then help where you can. It's the best charger in my opinion for Salmon Run, and also its playstyle is perfect hybrid weapon that can help in all situations. The two weapons that I think somewhat drag down this rotation are the Range Blaster and the Sloshing Machine. The Range Blaster is a powerful weapon overall, but it requires proper movement and targeting, otherwise you're not going to be doing damage at all, and you can easily find yourself splatted and overrun. Compared to a charger, if enemies get too close to you, especially small fries, it's much harder to get out of there, so keeping a healthy distance is vital for the Range Blaster. But since we're on the Hydroplant, you can stay on the walls, which is roughly a perfect range for your shots, and you can run in circles to stay in optimal range. They definitely excel at getting fish sticks and stingers just like most blasters, so they should be priority for you. But if you have a good feel for the gun, they can be exceptionally strong for grillers and glowflies thanks to their large AoE, so make sure you focus on firing during those waves. And finally, the Sloshing Machine. It's considered a pretty weak weapon in Splatoon 2 Salmon Run, and I've heard it received some buffs for Splatoon 3, but I haven't been able to test it yet. Generally speaking, it lacks both the single target damage and the painting ability that I really like about sloshers, but instead it has its own advantages, but you have to change your playstyle from a generic sloshing gameplay. The Sloshing Machine has a small AoE associated to its main hit, but mastering it takes quite a lot of practice and gives it a niche playstyle that generally makes it a bad weapon for freelance. The trick to using a Sloshing Machine against hordes, for example, is not to aim at the horde itself, since if your shot hits anything it explodes and disappears. But if you aim above hordes, your shot continues to fly over them, and its AoE tail that it carries along with it will hit the whole horde, splatting them all. This way, a Sloshing Machine can actually also deal with more annoying bosses like Scrappers or Steel Eels by shooting over their defenses and relying on the AoE damage to splat them without having to reposition. Overall, it's not a terrible weapon, but it requires a very niche technique to excel with, and because of that, most teams will be dragged down by them. But if you want to prepare for it, I recommend practicing on the training dummies. But that is it for all the tips for this week's Salmon Run, everyone. Hope this episode 4 was useful, and you know the drill. If you have any further tips for any of these weapons, share them with each other. And if you have any questions by chance, don't hesitate to ask them and we will do our best to answer. Good luck this week, my fellow coworkers. Hope you will have plenty of eggs. And I'll see you all in the next bonus episode, as this week has several cool things I'd like to talk about. Until then, take care and see you next time.